Hey there, and welcome to another one of our TLDR Explains videos. In this one, we're going to be taking a look at the laws around campaign spending, who's putting money into campaigns, and the main problems with our current laws. As part of TLDR's Christmas charity fundraiser, we've chosen 6 charities working around the world to support. One of those charities is the Against Malaria Foundation. The AMF provides funding for long-lasting, insecticide-treated nets. There's strong evidence that distributing these nets reduces child mortality in developing countries, including the Democratic Republic of Congo. Approximately 97% of all of their funding goes towards purchasing and distributing nets, making them one of GiveWell's top-rated charities. If you want to support the AMF, then you can pick up one of the Congo pin badges. You can find the badge on its own or as part of the full Series 3 set. Find out more and pick up the badge in our store. It's linked down below. So campaign finance laws are basically split into 3 categories: party spending, candidate spending, and third-party spending. We're going to start with candidate and third-party spending, simply because party spending laws are the most complicated. Before we get into this, a quick qualifier. Electoral law in the UK is stupidly complicated, spanning over 25 pieces of primary legislation and hundreds of bits of secondary legislation, so this is only a snapshot into it. Anyway, let's start with candidate spending. The regulation period for candidate spending begins when Parliament dissolves and goes on for 5 weeks until Election Day on December 12th. Candidates are allowed to spend £8,700 in their constituency, plus 6 pence per voter in borough constituencies and 9 pence per voter in county constituencies. This typically comes to somewhere between £10,000 and £16,000. There's also a £600 limit for personal expenses, and a £700 limit for any help they get from so-called non-party campaigners, people who aren't directly affiliated with their party, but are in some way involved in campaigning. Any money spent by these non-party campaigners above that £700 threshold counts towards the candidate's spending limit. All of this has to be reported to the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission, or EC, was created in 2000 by the Political Parties, Elections and Referendums Act, and is basically responsible for monitoring and regulating all these rules. For example, all personal donations over £50 have to be reported to EC, and have to come from permissible sources. A permissible source is basically any individual on the UK's electoral register, or any company registered in the UK. So wrapping that up, the candidate is allowed to spend around £10,000 to £16,000 on their campaign. Let's move on to third-party spending. Most of the rules around this come from the Transparency of Lobbying, Non-Party Campaigning and Trade Union Administration Act of 2014, which unsurprisingly has been abbreviated to the Lobbying Act. Third parties are companies and charities not directly affiliated with any political party, but who are essentially political campaigners. In 2015, there were 68 such third-party supporters, most of which were charities. Slightly confusingly, the campaign period for third parties has been backdated a year to December 12th, 2018, which means that any politically motivated spending from back then, say maybe over the European Parliament elections, counts towards their spending limit. Any third party that spends over £20,000 in England, or £10,000 in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, has to register with the Electoral Commission. But just because they have to register doesn't mean that's the limit to their spending. The spending limit for a UK-wide third-party campaign is £584,817. For an England-specific campaign, it's £479,550. In Scotland, it's £73,400. In Wales, it's £55,259. And in Northern Ireland, it's £37,550. There's also a £9,750 limit on spending in any specific constituency, and there are stricter limits on what's known as targeted campaigning. As a quick side note, the Lobbying Act has been pretty unpopular with charities and other campaigning organisations, because it's unclear what exactly counts as political campaigning, but it was introduced as a response to concerns about unregulated third-party campaigning. So let's circle back to political party spending. Again, like third-party spending, the regulation period has been backdated to December 12th, 2018, so any campaign expenditure since then counts towards their spending limits. This is super confusing, because there have been so many elections in the past year. There have been local elections, by-elections, European elections, and even mayoral elections. And all of these have their own separate expenditure limits. So let's put that complication to one side and talk about your bog standard general election spending limits. So your spending limit as a political party depends on how many constituencies you're running in. It's calculated as £30,000 per constituency you're standing in, or £810,000 in England, £120,000 in Scotland, and £60,000 in Wales, whichever number is higher. So hypothetically, you could spend £8,010 and only fight 2 seats in England. This calculation doesn't mean that you can only spend £30,000 in each constituency. That's the grand total you're allowed to spend. So if you're fielding candidates in all 650 seats, you'd have a spending limit of £19.5 million, which is pretty serious money. Those are the rules around general elections. For context, in European elections, it's £45,000 per MEP. So if you stand candidates in Yorkshire and the Humber, where there are 6 MEPs, your spending limit would be £270,000. The UK has 78 MEPs, so the maximum spending limit you could have if you fielded candidates in every region would be £3.51 million. The interesting thing is that your European election spending limits carry over into your general election campaign spending limits. So if you fielded candidates in the European parliamentary elections but didn't spend any money on campaigning, you'd have an extra £3.51 million to play with this general election. This means that the spending limit for a party standing in all 650 seats who didn't spend much at the European parliamentary elections will be about £23 million. When it comes to the donations that make up these funding budgets, anything above £500 has to come from a permissible source, and anything above £1,500 has to be reported immediately to the Electoral Commission. So those are the rules on campaign spending. There's one big problem though, and that's the blurry distinction between campaign and candidate spending. Basically, because of how the first past the post system works, UK-wide campaigning is a very inefficient way of winning votes. If you're Boris Johnson, you want to spend as much of your money on marginal seats as possible. There's no point spending money in the Brexit voting Shire seats, which you know you're going to win, and there's equally no point spending money in Remain voting city seats, which you're never going to win. You want to target your spending in those constituencies which actually matter to you. Now the tension here is that the political parties want to be able to declare this constituency-specific expenditure as national campaigning, so that it doesn't contribute to the candidate spending limit, which is somewhere between £10,000 and £16,000. If you can pass it off as national spending, you can spend hundreds of thousands of pounds in a specific seat. The Conservatives were actually fined for this back in 2017. That's because in 2015, they used battle buses full of volunteers in specific constituencies, like South Thanet, where Nigel Farage was standing. They declared the cost of these as national spending, and omitted certain things like the volunteers' accommodation costs. In 2017, the Electoral Commission said that it should have been counted as candidate spending, and fined the party £70,000. The evidence was then passed over to the Crown Prosecution Service, who charged Craig McKinley, the Conservative candidate for South Thanet, with knowingly overspending and misattributing funds. But this problem has got infinitely more complicated with online campaigning. The Conservatives were only caught last time because these so-called battle buses physically went into the constituencies. Targeted online campaigning can't be tracked or monitored as easily, which means that these larger political parties will be able to spend silly amounts of money targeting very specific voter groups. This concern is exacerbated by the fact that online advertising is more effective than traditional forms of advertising, and means that wealthier parties like the Conservatives will have even more of an advantage than before. This is definitely their plan as well. In 2015, the Conservatives spent 10 times as much on online campaigning as the other parties combined, and spent £1.2 million advertising on Facebook alone in the run-up to the 2015 general election. Anyway, Labour and the Lib Dems have caught up with this, with Momentum, a campaign supporting Corbyn, running a non-stop media campaign. Also, the Labour Party spent £1 million on Facebook advertising in 2017. According to Who Targets Me, the Lib Dems actually had 3 times as many unique personalised adverts as the Conservatives in 2017. If you're interested in finding out who's targeting you, we've put a link to the Who Targets Me browser extension in the description below. Anyway, so this is the big problem. Parties can spend massive national budgets targeting marginal seats, thanks to hyper-effective, personalised online advertising. So what have the Electoral Commission done to remedy this? Well, their official report refers to the honesty principle, which reads that in all cases, you should make an honest assessment based on the facts of the proportion of spending that can fairly be attributed to your campaign. Yep, that is their plan. Literally ask politicians nicely if they could be more honest about their spending. If you want to find out more about the election campaign as it plays out, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so that you can get updates every time we release a video. Also, if you'd be interested in watching our election night live stream, where we watch the results as they come in all night, then be sure to click the link in the description and then hit the button to be notified when that live stream goes live. And you can find more from us across all social networks simply by searching for TLDR News. And finally, if you want your name featured at the end of the videos, just like these people, then be sure to back us on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.